What is up, YouTube? It's Kingfisher745, and welcome to the relaunch of the Adamantium Process, the series that started it all. We're starting over at episode 1, and I believe it's going to be better than ever. And that's because I really think we're taking another step towards fulfilling our mission of helping all of you reach the Adamantium League. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm not going to limit the series to just showing powerful offensive teams, or even discussing defense. Instead, we're going to cover every aspect that we can when it comes to PvP. Oh, and I'm even going to include a tip from one of you, so make sure you leave your PvP tip in the comment section below. Now, for episode 1 and 2, we're going to be covering defensive teams, and in this first episode, we're going to focus on attack-based teams. So in other words, high attack, fast attack, and mostly attack-based hero and armory bonuses. The second episode will focus on high defense teams, those with exceptional HP and defense stats. They're more of a slow finish, outlast your opponent dot teams. On the screen, I'm going through one setup that you can use, and that is with Spider-Man Noir and Rocket Raccoon. But you don't have to use the exact same setup. Basically, what you want is follow-up or counterattack weapons, and the reason for this is because of their passives. Spider-Man Noir has Trigger Man, so chance for a follow-up attack when an ally does a counter or follow-up attack. Now, Spidey Noir by himself is pretty ridiculous, but it gets even crazier when he's paired with Rocket Raccoon. That's because Rocket also has a passive called Trigger Happy. High chance to join in on another ally's follow-up or counterattack. What happens when one of these two gets triggered? The other one will often go, and it ends up being a fairly long loop. Sometimes by the end of it, the enemy team can end up being completely dead. So if you've seen our video on them before, or you faced them, well, I am sorry because I'm probably at least in part responsible. But hey, it's one of those defensive teams that can work, and you can make it work for you. What you'll want is high attack bonuses and a way to trigger them. For some really good go-to items, the Mandible, Relentless Rapier, Cosmic Cardinal, or any high chance for a follow-up attack or counter will go a long way. For this build, we're actually going with a preemptive counter, and we get that from the Grace Note. Trust me, a preemptive counter is a very good way to go, because even if your team doesn't get to go first, you could still end up triggering these characters. But enough of the setup, let's go ahead and check them out in action. And it looks like it's going to be a mirror match. The enemy team's going to kick it off with a Relentless Rapier attack, and they also have collateral damage. However, they cause us to hit them back with the Mandible, and Rocket joins in. That could have been much worse for the enemies. They kind of got lucky there. One other thing that I did want to mention is I switched out the cube for the Guardian Insignia. Once again, your build could be different. You could use the Mystic even, and try to stop the enemies from winding your team. But remember, since it is a defensive team, you want to make it as simple as possible. Just stick to the main premise, and that's those counters and follow-ups. If everything goes well, you'll end up triggering attacks similar to this, and just think that was set off from a preemptive counter. That may end up being the difference in a mirror match. And we are getting kind of cheated as far as follow-ups, but the AI tends to get as many as they possibly can. So yes, this is definitely a nuisance team, and many times they'll get a really long loop of blam and beat it. After this, we're going to take a look at two other attack-oriented defensive teams. And by the way, I don't think they're going to be that affected by the stamina changes, but if any are, the last team will be. Still, our second setup and team is going to revolve around Quicksilver. He has been a staple of the attack-based defensive team for a very long time. Typically, he is at the center. And while there are different variations, we're going to focus on him and Star-Lord. So we'll see what makes them tick, give you a setup, and check them out in action. But first, since Spider-Man Noir and Rocket didn't trigger all that much in the first match, we're going to go ahead and take one more look at them. And while we do that, I'm going to read some of your tips. First, Joshua Glass said, "My PvP tip would be to remember that no defense or offense will work all the time. Going with the meta only means their weaknesses will be found and exploited all the sooner. I try to change things up a little just to see how things go. But remember, change is good, contrary to what Kingfisher might think." Okay, you got me there. I hate change because I have OCD. Everything Josh said are really good tips. He's definitely right that no defense or offense works all the time. That's why you do actually have to change things up from time to time. In my opinion, the most important part of his tips was that bit about the meta, because that is very true. If you do run a meta team, yes, they are good, but when people are building strong offensive setups, they're going to focus on countering the meta, or what's popular on defense, and that could very well mean they have the key to beating your team. So it can be very smart to try to think outside the box and have your own unique team, or at least a twist on the popular team. If you can improve upon the meta team, then sometimes that works out better than anything else. Alright, well, we've done a pretty good job of taking down this team, but I think we can get one more tip in. This next one comes from John Day Guy. A single PvP tip from me: learn the AI tactics. They usually will heal when one ally is low, and they will always use quick actions when available, and things like that. That is a great tip, and it's very true. One of the most important advantages that we have as a human versus the AI is that they have a pattern and we can learn it. In turn, we can adapt. Now, the way you do this is simply by fighting matches. You can do this in practice even. Just practice, and you can even go into practice mode so that you won't lose any rating or run out of battles. Repetition is the key, and before long, it'll just become second nature. You will be able to predict the AI's moves nearly 100% of the time. The only thing we can't predict, unfortunately, are random procs. But those were both great tips, and thank you for submitting them. Now, as for the Star-Lord and Quicksilver team, also known as Quicklord, it of course revolves around Quicksilver, but also Star-Lord's passives. His passives can cause allies to join in on single target attacks as well as retaliate, and when he comes up with 12% of a plan, he can give you an extra turn. Quicksilver is often featured with abilities like this because nearly 100% of the time he's going to get the first 2 turns. With these first 2 turns, he can trigger follow-up attacks, so that's why he went well with Psylocke. He can also trigger other passives, so extra turns for someone like Noir, or quite a few seasons ago, someone like Havoc. He's just been very consistent, and not only does he trigger all these passives and procs, he can also be beefed up to do a lot of damage. A character that has 2 actions per round, has mostly stealthy attacks, can do a ton of damage, and trigger procs and follow-up attacks. It makes you think someone over at PD must really love Quicksilver. And here I'm just kind of showing you a setup for him, but you can do it a number of different ways. I myself change it just about every time I use him. I don't think I've ever done it the same. We do have the special Scrapper EISO on him, and he is a level 15 and a Scrapper for this. So that's going to be pretty awesome. Plus we have the Bloody EISO on his tag team, so when he does his follow-up attack, he's going to place bleeding on all the enemies. We'll start with Close the Gap, and like I said, that's going to give him a guaranteed follow-up attack. So we launch with his level 1 stealthy blinding punches on whoever we want, and after that we get a tag team with the Bloody EISO on it. Also, for this team you will want to use the Cosmic Cardinal if you have it. It's going to proc almost every time. And the Relentless Rapier is great as well. Oh, and another crazy thing is Star-Lord almost always gets 12% of a plan during Quicksilver's first 2 turns. At least for the AI. For a while there it happened so often that I thought it was guaranteed. I mean, I knew it wasn't, but it certainly felt like it. But for this defensive team, you'll want to really focus on Quicksilver and the powerhouse he is. Just because it was recently on sale, we decided to use the Warbringer Axe. And then you'll want follow-up attacks Like I said, the Cosmic Cardinal and Rapier are some of the best. Other than that, the higher your attack bonuses, the better. Though sometimes this does create a glass cannon, and then the enemy may one-shot your team if they're still left standing. But definitely the goal is to blitz down your enemies. The only other thing that I want to say about this team is there are certainly other variations. Like I mentioned, a Quicksilver and Psylocke team. But I feel like this kind of represents them all, and it's the most popular one right now. Now, like I said, we're going to have one more attack team, and it actually is kind of debatable, but I felt like it fit. We're not really going to have as in-depth of a setup, but I am going to mention what I think you'll need if you're going to run that team. Then, like I mentioned, next week in episode 2, we're going to cover the defensive, slow win, dot your enemies to death teams. But anyways, in our current match, the enemy agent is about to go down, and then it's just Red Hulk remaining. Oddly enough, Red Hulk and Pestilence Beast are definitely one of those defensive teams, so we will focus on them next week. This one didn't fare all that well, but we did take Pestilence Beast down really fast, and that's the key. If you can remove the enemy's dots, then they're not that bad. But following a mandible counter, we're going to go ahead and use the Light Fantastic, and after that, Star-Lord should be able to finish this one off. By the way, on him you can use the Cooperative AISO on his level 9, and that'll make his rocks fall a quick action. However, in this case, it's not going to take him low enough, so we're going to go with Lit Up. And that's how this one's going to end. So moving on to our third and final team. Like I said, this one was kind of debatable, and I went back and forth on it. I think it can definitely qualify for a fast attack win team, and that's because your enemy should be dead by the end of the second round. That's a pretty fast win. But basically this team revolves around Molly Hayes and her temper tantrum. Where this team kind of follows the defensive strategy is you'll probably want to go with pretty high health and support weapons. Of course, the most important part of your support is going to be someone like Invisible Woman and her circulating EISO. Another option could be Iron Fist, or maybe even Nightcrawler, though I've never seen that. These characters are great because they prevent debuffs, but Invisible Woman keeps preventing them as long as you have shields, and that's why she may be the best. Though of course Iron Fist prevents debuffs as well. That is, if the AI is going to use his Praying Lotus or Healing Chi on Molly. Anyways though, why is it important to prevent debuffs? Because Exhausted can ruin Molly Hayes' tantrum. The entire goal of this team is to make it to Molly Hayes' temper tantrum, and then for her to finish off the enemy team. You can't do that if she's exhausted or dead. So you have to keep her alive at all costs. Plus, stop the exhausted debuff. So that's why this team's mainly support, yet still an attack-oriented team. It'll be a good bridge to the next episode. Now, one other thing that you could do with Molly that I haven't done here is to actually give her the Bruiser EISO. So the Elite Empowered ISO 8. That'll serve to pump up her attack even more and make her that much more lethal. So that's just an extra thought as we wrap this one up and come to the end of episode 1. Like I said, episode 2 will come next week and we'll continue defensive teams. As for this one, that's going to be it, but I want to thank you all for watching, ask you to please like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, good luck and take care.